Good morning. I think we're ready to kick things off today. Looks like we're going to have a fantastic weather for today's event. So we're looking forward to that. My name is Mark Gaggy. I'm Director of Member Services with Mass Golf. I'm joined today with Mass Golf staff members Jenna Walkowitz, who is in the back, as well as Kyle Sherman, and also Jesse Monaco, our Executive Director and CEO, who are here today. We'd also like to start by thanking the Woodland Golf Club team for hosting today's event, the first of what we hope will become a series going forward. We also wanted to recognize the Mass Golf member clubs that are represented today. That includes Bass Rocks Golf Club, Belmont Country Club, Brookline Golf Course, Cohasset Golf Club, Harbor Point Golf Society, Hopkinton Country Club, Lexington Golf Club, O'Carroll Country Club, Needham Golf Club, Tatnett Country Club, The Country Club, TPC Boston, Wampatuck Country Club, and the Links at Mass Golf. So thank you all for joining us today. And we also have representatives from Beals & Thomas, Hunter Industries, Northeast Industries, and Reed Custom Soils in support of today's event. So thank you all for attending. We also wanted to take this opportunity to recognize all of our member clubs and golf course superintendents in particular who hosted Mass Golf events this year. From qualifiers to our championships, nearly 100 clubs throughout the state hosted events for Mass Golf and thousands of players under some very difficult circumstances given the extremely wet and hot season, coupled with challenges posed by labor shortages. It was truly impressive to see the outstanding conditions produced by golf course superintendents and their crews across the state. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of our host clubs and their talented and dedicated superintendents. So for introducing our panel today, we have a very knowledgeable and diverse group for our education session. First, I wanted to recognize representing Woodland Golf Club, Chris Simon, the green chair. Thanks, Chris. Also, Ted Griffin, the golf professional. Chris Donadio, golf course superintendent. And from the project team at Woodland, we have Tim Clarke, the project manager for Tanto Irrigation, Matthew Staffieri, founder, owner, president, etc. for MAS Construction.
Schaefer, Digger.
And labor.
Tyler Ray, golf course architect for Tyler Ray Designs. And we are fortunate to have Brad Klein leading our panel today. Many of you know Brad from his work. He is a veteran golf journalist, author, golf course design consultant, and recognized authority on golf course architecture. So, and with that, we would like to hand it off to Brad.
Great, thanks. Pleasure to be here. I live in Hartford, so I had to get up here early before the I-28 Route 90 interchange. I managed to walk the course this morning, or half of it. It's my first time here. While I've written the biography of Donald Ross, I haven't seen all 411 of his courses, so one more. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk to the folks who have brought the Woodland back and restored it. Just a little bit. I've been writing about golf for 35 years now. I started in golf as a caddy, like a lot of people. I was lucky enough to caddy on the PGA Tour back in the late 70s, early 80s, back when total purse was $300,000. Now it's a 9-way tie for 5th. But back then it was a lot of fun caddying and traveling around with guys like Fluff Cowan, who was then working for Peter Jacobson and then graduated to Tiger. It was a different tour back then. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot, spent a lot of time with the players, and I got to see a lot. It was a great experience, 6 U.S. Opens, about 75 tour events, and I was lucky enough to be Bernhard Langer's first U.S. Tour caddy in German and in meters. And just to give you an idea, I had him on his 24th birthday at the World Series of Golf in Firestone. And I was all excited because I converted my yardages to meters by multiplying by 0.9. He turns to me and says, no, it's 0.91. So I had to go back and rejig all the yardages. And the story with Langer is you tell him it's 165 from the sprinkler head, and he'd say, which side of it? So wow. He was pretty precise. I started writing for Golf Week, a column on architecture in 1988. And since then I've gone on to write a lot. I'm still writing. I spent 27 years with Golf Week, ran their Raider panel. I had a panel of 800 people that reported to me, and I was traveling a lot in those days and seeing a lot of golf courses. And what was fascinating to me was the way in which by the mid-90s there was a shift in the emphasis in the golf industry from, well, there was a ton of new golf courses being built. There was easily one a day that was opening. But there was also starting a trend toward looking back and retrieving some of the history and the traditions of the game. You could say it really started with the 1988 US Open at the Country Club, which was the first real big championship that was claimed to be a restoration. And the word started filtering through the industry about the value of the old courses. There was a very unfortunate trend in the 60s and 70s, basically to obliterate the past. And it was led by folks like Robert Trent Jones, who really championed that effacement of the old classic tradition with his modernization of Oakland Hills for the 51 Open. And that was when he became the Open Doctor and all that. It was really a turning away from the traditions of the game. And it's gradually, only very gradually, that the industry has started to, has fully embraced the traditions of classic ground game golf, severe hazards at times, a golf course that could be fun and challenging, not just hard. And the industry has come a long way, and particularly now with the virtual, I wouldn't say disappearance, but new golf courses are rare, but the renovation market is just booming. And I've never seen it so active right now. I wrote about this recently in a column on the web called, it was firstcall.com, firstcallgolf.com. I wrote about prices and the expense and the inflation of and the unavailability of goods and pipe and seed and all this for the renovation industry. We'll talk a little bit about that because it's changed a little bit, the picture. But really the appreciation of golf is something that I was able to document in a series of books and in the rating panels that I ran for Golf Week. We divided the golf industry into classic and modern, and the break point was 1960. And by focusing on some of the really great old golf courses, Essex County Club, Salem, Worcester, so many others, we were able to really feature and focus on the value of our classic architects like Mackenzie and Tillinghast and of course Donald Ross. And it's great to see now a whole new generation of architects who were brought up in that tradition and appreciation, and Tyler Ray is part of that. And it really is a return to the old design-build model. For a long time, the industry in the 60s and 70s was essentially, and the 80s and 90s, a number of architects, most of the architects, and this was driven by the business model of the American Society of Golf Course Architects. Their idea of design was document everything extensively on paper, hand it over to a contractor and let them build it. And you lost a little bit of that craftsmanship. And ever since Pete Dye and the people who worked for him, and then Bill Corb, Ben Crenshaw, Tom Doak, Jim Urbina, Ron Pritchard, Gil Hands, those guys essentially are design building in the field. And that design build model has really transformed the ability to craft the character and to appreciate the landforms and to work with them rather than to obliterate them and to recreate something anew. You know, there's a whole generation of architects who believe basically that the site didn't matter. Tom Fazio made a big thing of this, no secret, we used to write about it. He said the site didn't matter, you could build anything. Well, now we know that the site matters and the landforms matter, and what you're doing really is trying to tease them out. And it goes back to a classic landscape architecture tradition of Frederick Law Olmsted about the genius of place and highlighting the character of the landform. So that's what this panel is going to be about, and we're going to talk a little bit about, for each of the participants, how you go about assessing a classic piece of land, how you convince people of the value of it, and how that has helped, I think, make the game more interesting and more fun. So let me start with Tyler. Tyler Ray, Design. Tyler has been very active, first with Ron Pritchard, now on his own. He's got a lot of projects out there. He just finished a big restoration of Beverly in Chicago. We can talk in much more detail. We're collaborating actually on the project of bringing back Wampanoag Country Club in West Hartford. That's the home of the Donald Ross Society, and I'm proud to be working with Tyler and with Kyle Franz, yeah, on a project there. And the kind of collaborative effort and the fun involved in minds meeting and working out there has been a lot of fun. So Tyler, let me start with you. When you're assessing a golf course for renovation restoration, what do you look for, and what resources are most helpful when you're determining where you're going to take the golf course?
Yeah, that's a deep question. There's lots of answers and many, gosh, I guess pathways I could go with that. But I guess the first time the club calls, I want to look at the year. A lot of people always say, "Oh wow, I visit a course, oh the land's great, this and that." I'm going to look at what year Tillinghast built it, or Ross built it, or Seth Rayner, or Flynn, like at the country club. So I want to look at the year, and then I can determine what period, what period style it was built in. Because there's many different layers of how these architects evolved. If something like at Essex was 1909 by Ross, it was very early in his career. And a lot of his greens were wide open, so you could run the ball in, and the ball was going so much lower, the ball flight, and the ball was running out a lot more. And the hazards were usually to catch balls on the sides of golf holes. And and then if a club like say Wampanoag calls that we're working at the home of the Donald Ross Society, it's a 1924 Ross. It's 15 years later in his career. And he started interjecting a lot more contour in his greens to defend par, a lot more hazards, many more hazards, fronting greens, because the game became a little more aerial. Steel shafts were coming in to fruition. Players were becoming, a little stronger, a little more adept at the game. So I always look at the year, when a club calls. So then I can kind of quantify, okay, what era was this in architecture, in the golden age of architecture, if it's an old classic club calling. So then I look at, I have two gentlemen who do research almost full time, and we'll look at any aerials we can get all the way back, as early as we can to see what was built. We'll look for any plans, obviously. So sometimes the crown jewel is if you get the triple whammy, the trifecta is you have a Donald Ross plan, then you have a really early aerial, and then it hasn't been touched because maybe they haven't had a lot of money to spend. So sometimes it's almost like it's just sitting there and you have to uncover it lightly. But those are some of the things I look at, and we'll look at all the period newspaper articles. Usually you'll find a lot of great newspaper clippings from the Boston Globe here locally, stuff like that, where you can, a lot of times they'll have tournaments early that, Francis Ouimet played here in 1913, and they give you a hole-by-hole description and where the hazards were. There was a punch bowl green on number 8 and a cape hole here, and so then you can kind of sort of put the pieces together. Then we'll also look at, what greens were rebuilt throughout the stages of, the lifespan of the golf course. So here I came to Woodland and I found out that there were 5 greens rebuilt by Jeff Cornish in the 70s and 80s, really probably 60s and 70s. So then I realized, you kind of, after about a month or two of working on the master plan to start, you kind of get down to the brass tacks and you go, okay, there's 11 original Ross greens here. Okay, well we're going to take those 11, we're going to fix those 7 and make them more Donald Ross-esque, and then try to get the layers of the substructure, the green makeup, and get them consistent and seamless throughout. Because we want, Chris, Donadio, and Mooch, who's here, maybe, who's the past superintendent emeritus, who's here forever. We want to get all those greens to be similar, consistent, so it's easy to maintain or easier to maintain. So we're setting these guys up for success. So there's a whole multitude of things, but definitely looking at the date, and we're looking at any historical aerials, newspaper articles, talking to older members even. You know, sometimes I was just at a club in St. Louis, and there was a member who had been, he was born in 24, and he had been a member since 1930. And he talked all about, you know, in the 40s, how they blew up a couple greens and did this and this, and they did Wilson in, and the reason they blew up the greens were they were so cool and fun and a little too crazy. And now they're just these bland, flat greens, but they stick out. So things like that, you just try to piece the puzzle back together and then get a game plan. There has to be a story. I always tell this to clubs, it's like, we have to have a story to sell to the membership. You know, a reasoning. Hey, why are we going to redo these bunkers? Why are we going to touch a couple of these greens? You know, there has to be a story. So here at Woodland, it was like, hey, we have the third golf course that Donald Ross ever touched, 1903. He worked on Oakley, and then he went down to Pinehurst and did Pinehurst #1 for the Tufts family, and then he came back to Boston while he was working at Oakley and did Woodland in 1903 with Alexander Finley. So this has incredible historical heritage. I mean, this is big time to be his third golf course. So I said to the club, why don't we try to take it back to that kind of Victorian early era Ross, where it looks like the horses and the scoops just pushed up the dirt and they kind of melted away, you know, and eroded away, and they look like they've been here for 100 years. You know, why don't we try to get that antiquity and that character and that New England feel? So that was the goal here at Woodland, was just, you know, okay, we found out that it was really early Ross. You know, what was he doing at the time? His brother Alec was the head pro. That's why he got the call over here from Oakley. And what was he doing at the time? And so you'll notice today, a lot of the fronts are open. You can run the ball in. But if you miss to the sides, the hazards are pretty penal. And there's a lot of character in the faces of the bunkers, because we wanted it to look really old. You know, like it almost has been here for 118 years, 119 years. And so anyway, that's kind of the long-winded spiel on where I go with it.
It's kind of an archaeological process where you're looking, you know, there's always a difference between plans and what was built. Sometimes it helps to go through club records. And there are some clubs, Old Elm in Chicago has perfect undistorted images of every green from 150 yards out on opening day. That's kind of an incredible resource. But the real question is, when you go around, you see ghost bunkers, you see old abandoned things. How do you decide to restore it, whatever that means, or to, you know, you mentioned about the evolution of Ross. When he was designing the golf course, his turn points might have been 200 yards in terms of the dog legs. A 400-yard par 4 was long. A lot of 470-yard par 5s. Obviously, the ball's going differently now. Equipment's changed. How do you decide to restore or to accommodate the character to the modern game?
That is the hardest part. Yeah, definitely. You know, the ball, see, there is a misconception. So now, okay, guys are hitting at 300, 330, 350 like Ted's son Cooper. You know, they just bomb it. But I think there's a misconception. People think they only hit it 200 yards. It's very different. They did hit it very far, but it only went probably 180 yards in the air or 200 yards in the air, but then it ran 100 because there's no irrigation. These golf courses, you look at these old aerials, the place was brown. You know, it was rock hard. And so a lot of these balls would run into these hazards, and a lot of these hazards that the architects placed were almost catching and saving bunkers to keep you in play because the ball was running off course so far, and there was no rough. You know, the rough wasn't irrigated, so I mean, we're talking maybe on a wet year like this year where we've had all this rain, it might be heavy, but on another common year, it'd be so dry out there. So they'd hit it 180 yards, really like a line drive, and then that puppy would run. So they were having, it wasn't uncommon to have 270-yard drives all the time. So these holes weren't as long as people think. But then again, that's why those approaches were so open, because that ball flight was so low, and then the greens were so steep back to front. A lot of these old classic greens from 1900 to about First World War, you know, 1918, 1920, you know, the greens are really steep back to front because they had to slow down that golf ball before it ran right over the back. But how do I decide? You know, I'll kind of collate, you know, all that information. It's all this information intake. You know, the newspaper articles, the aerials, the drawings, the land, and I always say, look, we have to fit the bunkers into the landforms. It's not a mathematical equation. We're fitting the bunkers into the landforms like you see at Dornick, or Carnoustie or anywhere overseas, St. Andrews. That's where the game began, and we don't just move bunkers into new landforms or just past landforms so they're blind. We fit the bunkers into the landforms, then we try to pull back the tees, for technology. And I had one seminal moment in my life where I've been fortunate to work with Tom Doak and Corn Crenshaw and Ron Pritchard, Keith Foster. And one day I was driving to Crystal Downs in Michigan, one of the great courses, Perry Maxwell. And this was probably 2009, and Tom was driving. We were going to play that afternoon, and we sat in his office all morning and talked about architecture. And I was talking about Moraine. So Moraine is a great old club in Ohio that was restored by Keith Foster, and we were pushing fairways out and taking out the trees, and I remember talking about the first hole, and I said, hey, we have these bunkers, they're about 220 off the tee, but we're going to push them down the golf hole a little bit, put them back in play. Tom Doak literally pulled the car over. We pull over on the side of the highway. He looks me dead in the eye and goes, what do you mean you're pushing the bunkers down the golf hole? I said, well, we got to get them back in play. He said, Tyler, you do not push the bunkers down the golf hole. You fit the bunkers into the landforms where they were originally intended, and you pull the tees back as far as you can. I said, well, Tom, I don't think it's the first hole. We can't pull the tees back anymore. It's the pro shop. He said, well, then, worst case scenario, you try to recreate that landform, that ridge, maybe push the ridge, 30 yards if you can. Or if there's another landform, try to fit them in there. So it was a seminal moment in my career where I said, holy smokes, I was just going to, do whatever Keith Foster was saying or other guys were saying and just, fill in those bunkers at 220 and then rebuild them down the golf hole just for technology. But I didn't realize how important reading the land was. And so you'll see today a lot of stuff out here. These bunkers might not be where some of the big hitters are. They might affect some of the older, or higher handicap players, but they fit in the landform. And when they fit in the landforms, they look seamless and consistent and gorgeous, and they don't stick out to the eye as unnatural. So they don't look goofy. They look like they've always been there. And I think that's the highest compliment. Like Brad, when you went to Cedar Rapids Country Club in Iowa that I restored with Ron Pritchard, I think you went out in 2017 and we rebuilt 3 greens and all the bunkers, and Brad didn't know which greens we rebuilt. I said, well, that's the highest compliment. From a very trained eye, he couldn't tell which greens we rebuilt. So in my opinion, okay, then we emulated Ross the best that we could, and we imitated one of the great architects. But that's what we do. We try to fit the landforms, and sometimes they penalize some of the members, and sometimes it's harder for some groups, but it should be more fun overall.
Yeah, it's a different approach to bunkering. I think modern bunkering, and a lot of golfers today are used to a bunker left and right at a landing point, and you have to fly the ball in, whereas the old courses, the ball rolled in. Question for Chris Simon. You were the Green Chairman during this whole process. How did you deal with educating members who are used to a certain golf course, and now someone's going to come in and take down trees and widen fairways and move things and create essentially a different golf course for them? How did you deal with the process of education? How did you engage the members, and what kind of response did you get along the way?
So our story was, we, prior to Tyler, had tried to get a major renovation through. It was around a $7 million project through, and there was a lot of education, a lot of talks and seminars and stuff, and it was really defeated soundly. So then, it was disappointing to a lot of people for the time that people put into it, and so we were back to square one. We really hadn't done much work on the club in a long time. Then we got defeated. Well, I wasn't involved in it. This plan was defeated. So then we scaled it way back. We did a survey, and we just decided to try to get something small passed. And one of the things that came up in the survey was bunkers. The bunkers were in pretty rough shape. The ball was plugging everywhere, and they were just old and haggard. And so that sort of led us. We wanted to get a win, and then we found Tyler just by chance, and but we still had to get it passed. But, and I'll be honest with you, So going from like a 7 million to a 1 million, that brought people to the table. And then this Tyler just killed it on the presentation. And I think the vote was 116 to 2 to get work done. And then the work done was so fantastic that we were able to, the next step we did was pass basically a $3 million irrigation project on top of the $1 million bunker project, and that went right through. So we probably won't do a work for a little while, but that's sort of the history of how we got it done.
Did the two people then claim credit for the success of the plan?
No. There's a lot of people.
That's what you want.
Yeah.
Ted, you're the golf professional here. You have the most contact on a day-to-day basis. What was your experience and what lessons did you acquire, if any, in the process that golf professionals here can learn in terms of getting a project started?
Well, I think, like Chris Simon says, it goes back quite a ways to a couple of other projects we tried to get through that didn't. So you kind of learn from your mistakes and how, why they didn't go through. And I think the approach taken for this last project really started when we were extremely fortunate to bring Tyler in. But from my standpoint, my basic job in the whole thing is to kind of help educate the membership on what we're doing and what benefits it could have going forward. I've always thought, my personal viewpoint is that you inherit a golf club in a certain condition as members and as employees, and it's our job to bring it to the forefront and make sure it extends its life going forward. And I think as the golf pro, it was my job to help educate the membership on what we were doing, why we were doing it, and what benefits the future members would have. But on a day-to-day basis, I think our biggest job is the membership has to be informed what's happening. Once you start, it's not over. My opinion is that that's when most of the work starts, because we have to keep the membership informed of what the progress is in the golf course, and you can't do a project like this as hard as they work and not have holes or greens or tees closed. And you don't want the membership coming out on a day-to-day basis finding, oh wow, what's going on here? I can't play golf today. So on a monthly, weekly, and even daily and hourly basis, we send emails out, we send text messages out informing the membership what's going on. And we've been very fortunate so far. The crews we've had out there, the great job they've done, and of course we're very fortunate to have Tyler. I wrote a little piece in last winter before the project started saying that had we started this process a year later, we wouldn't have been fortunate enough to get Tyler, because I thought that he was an up-and-coming star in the design business, and that I think we'll be very fortunate that we started at the right time. So once we started the project and up until now, we do a lot of work. We do videos. We've done. We had one of those, what do you call it? Taking pictures from up above. We had the drone, and it hasn't stopped. And we've got a lot of work left to do, and we'll continue what we're doing.
Just so you know, we're going to do, continue with the kind of opening statements, then we'll open up a conversation. I have a question or two that I think can spark that. Could you talk a little bit, Ted, about one of the big controversies when you're doing a restoration is to get rid of the intermediate cut and to go from fairway to rough, because it particularly...
You had to give me that one, didn't you?
Yeah. Particularly in the cool season environment where there's a similarity of grasses, an older golf course. It creates a lot of great definition, but it also creates a lot of frustration because someone misses the fairway by a little bit and they're in the heavy rough and they start cursing you. So how did you overcome that resistance?
Well, a little history, and Chris, you might jump into this, but we tried it once before, and I think it was kind of like in the middle of the year, maybe? Or,
yes.
And the members came out here one day to play, and the intermediate cut was gone. And I will never forget, they came in that afternoon and said, to be very kind, they said, what is going on the golf course? There's no intermediate cut. They didn't quite use those words, but that's kind of the impression I got. And I would say that after about a month, the intermediate cut was back.
It was.
Yeah, it was.
It was a week.
Yeah, it was 1 week. So it didn't go over real well. But I think you see more and more, Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's more and more courses going away from the intermediate cut. A lot of the great courses across the country don't have it anymore. So I think now going forward a year, I have to try to convince people when they came into the shop to plan a weekend that said, and telling them, well, you know, Marion doesn't have an intermediate cut, or Medina or whatever, some courses, that we're putting ourselves in a little bit different category. Now, I don't know if those particular golf courses have an intermediate cut or not, but those type of golf courses. So when we opened up this spring, lo and behold, the intermediate cut was gone and nobody knew it. There was nothing said.
Yeah.
I never heard about it. I think the fact that we tried to do it in the middle of the year and all of a sudden that little fluffy lie they got before they got into the rough was gone. It went over, it didn't go over well at all. But this spring when they came out to play and it wasn't there, I'm not quite sure no one knew it until we
No, I
told
never
them.
heard anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, presumably the fairways got a little wider to cover the
did.
area,
They did,
so
but-
that you compensate a little bit, not that the members, you know, they're still gonna run into that marginal, but the other thing is it makes it a lot more complicated when you have intermediate to resolve the mowing pattern around the greenside bunkers, and plus you can save a little bit of money these days by eliminating that one-step cut, so.
Yeah. And where Tyler kind of brought the fairway bunkers into the fairways, it was very difficult, and there was almost no room to have the step cut in a lot of situations.
So let me follow up, Chris, Superintendent here. How do you, when you're doing a project like this, you could hand the whole thing over to a contractor, or you could save some money and time and weather cooperating, take on some of the risk yourself. How did you decide what tasks, sodding, whatever, you were going to take on in-house and what you were going to have a contractor do?
Yeah, so during this project, I mean, we pretty much let Matt, you know, take care of everything and stay out of his way as best as we could. The only thing we took on really in-house was the irrigation. We knew we were going to do an irrigation system down the road after the bunkers were done. So we kind of temporarily did the best we could with the irrigation that we could install, you know, with our staff. You know, but on a day-to-day basis, it was just kind of giving Matt what he needs and then getting out of his way and really letting him go.
And how do you decide that? Is that, I mean, are you comfortable, or does your crew get comfortable getting on equipment, or is that where the boundary is, or what?
No, so we don't have a lot of construction equipment on property because we have a tunnel that goes through the property and most stuff won't fit through. You know, so we don't own really anything, you know, and I think that has kind of led us to a point where when we do a project, we have to hire somebody, you know, because we're bringing equipment around through the roads. We can't get it through the golf course, so that kind of, you know, really holds us back doing stuff.
Matt Staffieri, can you describe the role of the contractor? What are some issues that arise normally between contractors and clubs in the process? And in this particular case, you're dealing with, Tyler, you did some of the shaping yourself, right? So how do you negotiate where the handoff is in the work in terms of shaping versus, you know, earth moving?
Yeah, no. So in a project, we've been fortunate enough to work in some similar projects like this where there's shapers involved and we kind of come in and do cleanup work behind them. But this project was unique in itself. I mean, it happened during COVID. So a big thing for us is movement of the golf course. And so we started this job in March. There was nobody here. Then COVID hit and we had, I mean, everything was at a standstill. I mean, you drive down I-90 and there was nobody on the road. So we only had half a staff. Tyler put in an unbelievable effort. I mean, we were working with a half a staff on this side of the golf course just to get it done. And, you know, we didn't get some of the guys back till even June. Labor was a shortage, but the fact that there were no golfers here, we were able to kind of just boogie our way through the holes. When there's golfers in play, obviously it's a little bit more difficult, and I think that's where the communication comes in for us, is that obviously we want to get the job done as soon as possible. You guys want us out as soon as possible. But we need the communication to close holes, move tees, have temp greens, because, you know, the sooner we get done, the better we are for you guys to get out of the course. And that was good here because we had nobody, but then all of a sudden back when everything opened up, it was the busiest it's ever been. And that was like another, you know, so we're doing really good, and then it's like, whoa, we have all these people now. And, you know, they're walking, they're taking carts, they're parking on the cart path, we're trying to stay on the cart path to prevent damage. So there's a lot of different things going on. I think it goes back to Teddy, is that what Teddy spoke on earlier is the communication between Chris, myself, Tyler, Chris Simon. We had to really, it was really imperative once the courts opened up, because it was a whole different ball game. And then, you know, throwing a railroad in the middle. So everything we had to do this section and then move everything over to the other side. And you couldn't even get, you know, materials. The only thing we could get for our equipment through there was the workmen. So everything had to be kind of finished up here. We gave this to the club, went over to that side. It definitely was a good job. It was interesting, and by that time everybody had, you know, started playing. So it worked out pretty good. We kind of got a jump on it, and then that made up for some of the, you know, the busyness. But the huge part is just working with the club and keeping everybody abreast of where we're working. I mean, you know, it takes, to do a bunker job like this, you need 2 or 3 holes open at one time. It's not like, well, we're going to be on the 3rd green and nowhere else. I mean, you have to be on the 3rd green. We have to open up stuff for Tyler so he could come in and do his stuff. So you have 1, 2, 4, 3 or 4 holes open at one given time at various states. And I think that's what is important to let the membership know. You know, and it's just because it's open, it might be a 2-week process before it's stripped to when you have grass back on it. But it's getting done. But you know, I think people got to be aware of what this process is, you know. So the more we can educate them and the more they can see us. But I mean, these guys were great in letting us, they knew we weren't stopping when they were teeing off. We can't do things like that to get it done. And they were very good in accommodating for that. You know, they waved us on, they did what they could to get us out of here so, you know, they could have their golf course back.
Just to be clear, when you say have the hole open, you mean have it closed in order to strip the sod,
Yeah.
area disturbance?
Yep, like for instance, like we're on the 1st green. I mean, you know, we're on the green. If they want to put a tee, if they want to put a temp hole in the approach, that's great, you know. And that's fine. We can be in play. It's not a problem. I mean, we've all been hit. It's not fun, but you know, it happens. And but as long as we have an area to work, and you know, like around a green is, you know, down here there's 4 or 5 bunkers. I mean, that keeps us busy. You know, you just gotta accommodate. You know, temps are, you know, it's not a big deal. I mean, gets it done. You know, that's not what everybody wants to play, but it's only temporary, so.
Yeah, there's a basic conflict, I think, in construction scheduling, because members want their golf course. So they're reluctant to turn it over until the Patriots start playing. And then what happens is you lose your seating window and it gets dark, and the next thing you know, it's snowing. So in a climate like this, how do you negotiate with the club about the ideal time? Because a lot of clubs would rather break it up into 2 or 3 seasons.
They do, and I think the best part, I mean, ultimately I think getting it done in one lump, like shy, is really good. Like it was very different. I mean, these guys chose to start in spring, which is, you know, it's almost becoming more ideal than fall, because nobody wants to give up the course in September. Then, like, we're in October now. You know, October, it's, by the end of this month, it's short days. And then November is a crapshoot. I mean, I remember being at Cohasset, and you know, it snowed in the beginning of November, and then it rains. I mean, so the spring, come March, you have, you know, plenty of light. It's a little bit cold, but it's wet now versus wet then, and you can really get, you know, out there. And you're usually out of there by June, and you know, everybody has what they want back. But it, you know, the people have to lose. You can't lose September anymore. I mean, the club's always wanted to get you in there after October 15th, but if you get in anywhere after October 15th, you're not really getting anything done. Especially a bunker project like this in the Northeast. There's just, there's no timing. You know, you have to be there end of August, early September, the latest, and kind of, you know, get it done. Because it'll just go into the spring. So what I don't think the membership understands is the later you start, the later we're going to be there in the spring. And that, you know.
Yeah. Well, you can't put seed in the ground after September 15th, so then you're committed to sodding, which is a lot more expensive.
Yeah, we try, exactly. Anything we try to seed greens, we try to do that in, you know, late September, late August, early September. A lot of work we do is sod. A lot of guys are growing grass, their own nurseries for greens, expansions. That's what we did here, you know, and that's good. We can move that at, you know, any time, but obviously, you know, September, October is the ideal time to do anything with greens or like that.
Yeah, and I've never been involved in this before, but the combination of Matt's company and Tyler's, like, the members just loved it. I mean, Tyler, I don't know how he got the work done. He was doing all the shaping, but he was getting off the bulldozer all the time to tell the members what he was doing, and they loved it. Matt's crew was fearless. I don't even remember closed holes being really, multiple holes being closed down. They just kept working, and so I just think the relationship between these two made it all the better, and it seemed to go by very quickly, and people were playing, and it wasn't like, oh God, we're playing 12 holes today, this isn't golf, but that really wasn't the experience we had. And I think it was, again, the combination of these two working together, and people liking them, and that made a big difference.
In that process, Chris, were you kind of the clerk of the works, monitoring, and did you have to acquire a lot of the material beforehand, or was that all supplied by Matt's crew?
Most of it was supplied by Matt, except for what, loam?
Yeah. Bunker sand.
Yeah, bunker sand. I mean, we kind of worked together just to make sure product was here, what we were missing.
Which the train tracks got, multiple different staging areas, because you can't have, 3 shells left of bunker sand here because there's no way to get it over there, So we had to really time our materials right so we didn't have an excess in the parking lot. But it's really helpful to have a few staging areas, and they gave us what we needed. They shut the parking lot down, and we were able to work. When it's the smaller the space, the harder it is to get done, the longer it takes. But yeah, they were pretty good with it. Yeah.
Tim, Tanto Irrigation is one of the biggest contractors in the country, been around for a long time. When you get involved with a club, how do you go about evaluating the irrigation system and deciding whether it's going to be a full replacement, partial, or you can live with it? In effect, what's the lifespan of an irrigation system these days?
Sure. Typical system, PVC, 20, 25 years. Anything past that, you're probably living on borrowed time. The sprinkler heads, central, those kinds of things, you're probably every 10 years or so, technology seems to change. Most of the time when we come into a project, a consultant has brought us in there, they've already made a determination on whether we're starting from scratch or we're going to try to save whatever's there. More often than not, you end up going with a new system.
And who was the consultant here? Was that?
Brian Van Cave.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Question for the panel, and maybe everyone can get involved. There's been there was a reference to member communication. Is there a difference between member communication and member input? There's a fine line between listening and or pretending to listen to members. How was that done here? Were there focus groups? Did you actually listen to what they were saying in terms of suggestions, or was it more showing them what you were doing and why? That's for the
Well, I mean, I think you have to be fortunate to have the board of directors you have to have a good board of directors and people that know what it takes to not only start a project but to work the club through the project. And we had one gentleman, we've got a great president right now, Dan Casey, but there's the vice president of the club right now is very experienced in construction, and I mean, he's been hands-on with a lot of things here for a long time. His name's John Randall. We've been very, oh, is he here?
He's in the back.
Oh, he's here. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring his name up. I didn't know he was here, but he's in the back, and Woodland has been more than fortunate to have him involved because he knows a lot of what it takes to get this to work. And as Chris said previously, we tried a project, maybe an overstep, a few years ago, and the membership just wasn't going to buy it, and you kind of had that feeling going in. But I think the people that were involved, the board that was involved in the most recent two projects, the bunker work, the course work, and the irrigation project, knew that they had to bring in focus groups and educate people on how and what we were doing and what the benefits of it were. And I think thanks to their work and everybody, the professional staff and Chris and everyone else here, that's why I think the vote, like Chris said, went I don't know, was it 2 people voted against it and 160 or 70 voted for it. So I think it's you have to understand what the membership will withstand and what they want, but they also have to be kind of guided in the direction of what's needed. And that comes from, I think, Tyler.
And then,
Chris?
so Tyler did his presentation, and I didn't really know Tyler at the time, but it, you know, he had a you know, a plan in place. And then, but once he gets out on the land, it does change a little bit, you know. And people, I was surprised because I remember him doing the first hole, and it just came out spectacular. And I said, I'm done. I mean, this guy is the star in my book. But then he changed a couple of things, and people looked at the plan and said, what is he doing? And, you know, and I just gave him the leeway. But again, we had to have discussions and tell people that, you know, a couple of things had changed. We moved a cart path and on one side of the hole, green to the other, and people said that wasn't on the plan. And then Tyler made that punch bowl on number 8, you'll see today, and that wasn't on the plan. But again, we got the word out that you know, he saw some things in the land and that he didn't see on the original plan, and it got smoothed over. But that did come up.
Yeah, there's some tough decisions in any project, and you get into the nitty-gritty, and it's not a rogue architect per se, but yeah, sometimes you're out there and you just watch so many golfers, you know, play a different hole, and so we had to flip a cart path for safety, and ultimately I think it was almost one of the best decisions we made during the project. But some of those are really, really tough decisions, and you get a lot of consternation and a lot of but, you know, not backlash, but a lot of people who are passionate, who've been here 30, 40 years, and they tell you you don't know what you're doing. And then at the end of the project, it was their idea, you know, usually. But humor aside, yeah, some of these were really tough decisions, but sometimes you get out there and you see the drainage, you know, moving off a golf hole, and you had a bunker right in the middle of the swale, and it wasn't going to work, so you have to shift the bunker a little bit, just so surface drainage gets around it, stuff like that. Cart paths, you know, you see traffic patterns, but in the end, those really tough decisions probably make it a lot better.
Question for that, because I'm experiencing that at a club where we're working. We have a plan, we're implementing it, and when someone who thinks they're influential wants to change it, we say, no, we got this plan, we got to follow it, and then now we're boxed ourselves in the corner because there's a bunker or two where we didn't anticipate. We have to change it, so we're gonna leave that for last. But that's a complicated process. From a construction standpoint, Matt, when you bid a project, how do you handle those kind of field changes? Are you bidding, you know, time and material, or how does that work short of a change order?
Most of our stuff's a unit price. So Tyler kind of set up a unit price, and we always go into most of that, like, so we have a schedule of values. All these architects put them up, and it gives you square footage of what you're doing. And for the most part, you kind of know what's involved. I mean, if you don't know by now, you really shouldn't be doing it. But so there's going to be, especially, you know, with working with guys like Tyler that shape their own stuff, it's a little bit different than when you're shaping it yourself. When you shape it yourself, it's a little bit quicker, so to say. Not actually quicker, because then it has to be somebody has to come in, like, you know, other guys would want to paint their own lines and stuff. Whereas Tyler, when he's done, it's done. So it's kind of, for us, it's nice. You know, he comes in, he shapes all his own stuff, he paints a line, and then he's out. And it works really good, so we know the cleanup's there, and we kind of know our role. But as far as getting back to the budget, if you look at the schedule of values, and you just kind of keep track of it, then, you know, sometimes you're over, like here we were over a tremendous amount of moving grass. I think we put almost, 500,000 square feet of sod down, 100,000 of it being moving bent grass from one spot to
lift and relay.
Yeah, which is very time consuming. But it got done, and then, you know, so we were over there, but we were under another part. So overall, I think it's just the communication of keeping sure, you know, something like this, it was about 5 or 6 billing cycles, so we were able to tell where we were throughout the project. You know, we'd be over on one thing but under on another, and that really helps, you know. And then towards the end, you just gotta hone it in a little bit, you know. But there's things that change all the time, as far as, because he'll get out there and the line grows, and you can't worry so much about, you know, until like where it is. I mean, you ultimately have to get it done right to get the job done, and, you know, we kind of work those things out towards the end.
Yeah, and I've learned, you know, being hands-on. This is probably my if I started in '04, this is like year 17 or 18 for me. I've learned, you know, when you're doing the plan and you're doing the bid, you know, putting it out the bid to the contractors, I'll create all the numbers, obviously. You know, all the square footages for green expansions and bunkers and grass and lift and relay in the fairways. The day before I put that out, I'll try to fly up to the club or get out to the course and really just walk it one last time and look at all my numbers. And I'll put a little bit in my back pocket. Of course, like anybody, you know, anybody does a budget, you know, for a living, like all you superintendents in here. So I always put a little bit in my back pocket.
Explain what you mean by that. That could be misconstrued.
Yeah, well, yeah, not monetary wise, but I put a little bit of square footages in my back pocket. You know, I'll add 30,000 square feet of sod, because sod, you know, your two highest line items are sand and sod. You know, especially bentgrass sod. So sand and bunker sand and bentgrass sod. So you got to get the bunker square footage really close. So we'll measure everything with my guys. I have 4 full-time guys. We'll measure it in the office, all that. And when they give me that number, I'll put like 10% on the bunker square footage, just so I know, hey, if I'm moving a bunker, I'm adding one here, you know, yada yada. I know where I'm at. I feel really comfortable. And same thing with sod. You know, the guys will measure everything on AutoCAD. But AutoCAD is one flat plane, like your table. But then when you throw your napkin on your table, it's wrinkled like the land. So you gotta know that you're gonna have way more sod than what they measure on AutoCAD. Same with bunker square footage. You know, bunkers are usually you have some facing and some cavity in there, but everything on AutoCAD is flat. So I always put a 5% on any numbers we measure in AutoCAD, and then I probably throw another 5 just for playing around. And then when Matt's billing, you know, every bi-weekly or bi-monthly, you know, like the AIA billing is for architecture and building.
American Institute of Architecture.
Yep, American Institute of Architects. So when we're billing every 2 weeks, you know, like Matt said, we have all these bills coming in. We know where we're at. We're tracking. And these guys, I request that everything gets GPSed. I'm telling you guys, when you're doing a project in the future, pay that extra 10 grand up front to GPS everything as you go. Because you'll get the GPS numbers. I was on Matt all the time. Hey Matt, get your GPS out here. I want to know exactly where I'm at. So you're a month in, I don't want to be tracking at 10% over on bunkers or 20% over on sod. So every time he sent a bill in, we were tracking. So we get down to the last 2 weeks and we're like, I think I came to you and I said, we're 80 grand under. And then what did we do with that? What did we end up doing? Well, I know we spent a little bit of money on, you know, better building stuff and a couple other things, but we ended up spending it always. You always end up spending it. But we brought the you know, I don't know how many bunkers we did, 69 bunkers, 72 bunkers, and all this work and all the greens, all the 24,000 square feet of green expansions, I mean, major green expansions, and we brought it in. I think it was 80 under in the last 2 weeks, and then we ended up, you know, doing some loose ends with that. But we were under budget because of all that planning beforehand. I think that's the most imperative part. So.
One last question, then we're going to go to break. Tim, how extensive was the irrigation work, and how did you coordinate that with the master plan? And at what point was that coordinated?
Sure. I mean, we received the plan. The bunkers and everything were already done by the time we got here. So we've just been working in grass, which has been fantastic. So everything was done ahead of our arrival. So it's an extensive project. There's a lot of heads out there. I don't know what the total count is. I don't remember, but I mean, it'll be wall to wall by the time we get done.
But you kept the pump station and the main lines?
Yeah, the 2 well sites.
So it was basically laterals and part circles and so on?
Mainline laterals, screens, loops, yep, everything.
And just a word, could you describe, you said an irrigation system is kind of lifespan 20, 25 years. What's the difference now in terms of irrigation head distribution and the quality control and efficiencies and the environmental side of that before we take a break?
You know, I think years ago, the systems used to be spaced 65, 70, I mean, even higher spacing, right? And it was mostly double row, single row. Now you end up with spacing in the 60s most of the time. 60, 65 is more normal. You know, the pipe size has grown over the years. I mean, it was 5 feet per second was, you know, pretty industry standard for a long time. Now it's 3 feet. So, I mean, you get a lot more, you know, you're going to get a lot more longevity out of a system these days too. So a lot of those things go into it. You get a lot more control with more heads. I know it sounds funny, but you actually probably end up using less water in the right places, more so than just putting it with a double row system. you're going to water too much in the middle and not enough on the sides. You know, by having 3, 4, 5 rows, you're going to be able to put it in the right spots.
A lot of us grew up on spacings with the pressure heads at 90 feet, and half the water would dissipate, evaporate, or just get blown
Yes.
before it landed on the ground.
Those were controlled leaks.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I've been involved on a consulting basis at a lot of clubs over the last 25, 30 years, I guess, and some big name, behind, you know, I kind of help walk clubs through. One of the things that I want to, when we open up for conversation, every club has a different identity, every club has a different culture. A lot of clubs have the same issues in terms of the intermediate cut, the trees. A lot of clubs have issues with forward tees not being short enough. One of the things I've learned is that every club also has a different budget and a different understanding of what's capable for them. So the conversation, it's not like you have to go through a multi-million-dollar renovation or restoration. There are lots of things that clubs can do internally, long-term planning. I've been involved in Tyler's backyard, really, Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, which is right next to Wilmington. I've been basically coordinating a master plan for 17 years now, long-term plan. We're finally doing the bunkers, and it's a total package, I think, of $800,000. So it's one of those clubs that doesn't have a lot of money, but they're spending it wisely. So there are all sorts of different ways, different approaches. Sometimes you can do a lot of this stuff in-house in terms of mowing patterns, in terms of tree removal. So it's a wide variety out there. It's not just all these massive, you know, I think sometimes the news coverage is about the $13 million they spent at Oakland Hills or Baltusrol. You don't need to do that in order to make your golf course better. So with that in mind, I'd like to open it up for questions, and maybe you want to direct it to someone, or you can also make a statement in the guise of a question. That's always a clever thing to do in terms of your own experience. So let's open it up.
Hi, Justin Lawson from Brookline Golf Course. I spent most of my career in the private world, and now I'm in the municipal world. And just the impacts of golf course renovations and how they impact the environment is probably one of our biggest challenges in terms of tree removal, wetland management, and stuff of that nature. How have you tackled this? And it's really kind of applicable to anybody who's had the experience, but you know, encouraging people that taking down trees isn't going to be the end of the world in terms of our carbon footprint and that sort of stuff, but really kind of a beneficial experience for the renovation, restoration project in its entirety.
Chris, you want to try to take the first cut at that?
Yeah, so I think for the last, you know, several years, we've kind of been in a situation where we're really just addressing dead, dying, diseased, which we have a lot of. You know, it seems to be every year we can kind of fill our winter with that. So we really haven't been in a situation where we've been removing anything that's been healthy. Newton has some strict laws with tree removal as well. So, you know, kind of, you know, going by their guidelines, we're really not allowed to remove or clear cut really anything without replanting.
We're the same kind of process. So
Yeah.
I just think a lot of our trees are in that same category, dead, dying, and diseased.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, one of the issues with trees is they lead to a lot of disease pressure, and it can increase the chemical budget and the fungicide and insecticide budgets of golf courses. And so if you can make a case that by opening up, and the whole conversation, I think, and curious to get Tyler's read on this, I think a lot of the conversation about trees got poisoned by Oakmont. People think that when you're dealing with tree removal, which you should never talk about, by the way, you should talk about tree management, because what you're introducing is a tree management plan that most clubs have never had. I've done a lot of historical research, and you read the board decisions, and they were just randomly planting trees everywhere in the 60s in particular, and the result was a kind of closing in and a loss of air movement and sunlight, and which really restricted the growing environment and created a lot of disease pressure. So what you're trying to do is open up a healthier environment for cultural practices, for healthier turf, and it's more selective tree management rather than wholesale removal, you know, a la the big shave. I don't know if you see that with your work.
Right. You know, we've had so many questions about trees that I've actually had an arborist working with me for 3 years who's a retired New Jersey state tree expert. He worked for 8 different presidents, but we try to do tree management plans for so many clubs. I think I have 21 clubs right now that I'm doing tree management plans for. And we go in and we assess all the trees on the property and tag them and all that. But we're trying to declutter the interior and then replant on the exterior. You know, to kind of, same thing in Woodland, you know, we're trying to block the exterior and the views of the houses and then, you know, views into the golf course and then declutter the interior. The hardest part about this, and as all you all will see today, is if I had my way, I'd cut down probably another 300 trees out here, you know, because there's just so much. It'd be great to open up more of the sight lines, the views throughout the property, get the wind moving, you know, help for the photosynthesis around the greens, you know, growing turf, all the tree roots. You know, there's so many maples out there. Maples are prone to having high surface roots, poor form. They're not a great, you know, golf course tree. So we've come up with 44 golf course centric trees that we've kind of curated for clubs. You know, so we're not putting sycamores on courses or sweet gums or, you know, stuff that are trashy. So we're putting out, you know, instead of like a sweet gum, you get the same gum in the same family, you get a black gum. Beautiful red, fiery color in the fall, but they don't drop the sweet gum balls. So stuff like that, we're replanting. And then we're screening a lot of perimeters with, you know, in the south, you know, magnolia, sweet bay magnolia, a lot of laurel cherries, hollies, you know, stuff like that where it keeps their foliage 24/7. So here, you know, at this club, we'll see some fencing around the property, stuff like that, where in the future, I'd really like them to plant more of those hollies, laurel cherries, skip laurels. You know, what else keeps it? Up here, you can't really do magnolias, a little too hardy. But as Mother Nature, you know, the zone is climbing. We're going to be zone 5 and 6 soon. So, but stuff like that, you know, it's really tough though in this township. It's impossible, you know, with tree removal.
Thank you.
Do you still use the tree removal for direction of players and keeping them? You know, we have a lot of neighbors on our property. You know, trying to put trees to keep people right, but it seems like people go and close the trees. That's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, the question was, do we use trees to kind of direct play, I guess, and people? We do. I'm not a big fan of aerial hazards. You know, you go over to the British Isles, there's no aerial hazards. You know, there's no trees, and so that's where the game began. So I'm a big fan of more open playing corridors. Like Donald Ross said, probably one of my favorite quotes from Ross is, you know, trees should serve perhaps a part of the scenery, but never upon the stage. So he referred to it as a play. You know, so trees should serve perhaps a part of the scenery, but never part of the stage. So meaning, okay, they're great on the peripheral, but they should never really come into play on the golf course. You know, or during the game, they shouldn't really encumber your shots. So I always love that quote from Ross. But yeah, here, and you know, maybe at your golf course, there are some situations where if you plant, you know, a good species, a good oak, you know, shingle oak, swamp white oak, stuff like that, that aren't going to drop a lot of the nuts. Or some new species of elms are great, Princeton elms, frontier elm. There's a bunch of different great elms that are Dutch elm disease resistant, stuff like that. But you can plant them in some specific corridors if you're trying to break up, you know, holes for safety. But trees are, you know, they don't really help so much, but they will help break up some things sometimes.
My question, Jim Austin, Lexington Golf Club. My question is about the best practices for sand. I played out oyster shells and ground marble and some really interesting things. But what's the best practice for, you know, what kind of sand did you put in here and what's the best practice of keeping it maintained?
Can we trade Chris Simon or Chris Donadio on that
Yeah,
one?
good.
Yeah, so we had, when we were looking at sands, we kind of built a bunker with, you know, 2 sands that were local, easy to get, and, you know, we let the membership kind of choose what they liked. You know, after that, it was a 50-50 split. I mean, they didn't really pick one or the other, so we kind of made that decision.
But it was Foster, we went with Foster,
Yes.
#1 sand, I think, which is, Dedham has it, I think the Country Club, I believe, has it, and so we did a little bit of research. I played Dedham, and again, I like the sand. Tyler really wasn't involved in that, but he said it was a super important decision to take your time and get the right sand. And we did let the members have some input on it. And then I played, again, a course, and it worked out really well. It took a little while for it to settle. We got some plugs maybe the first season. I was thinking about that this weekend. I don't think I've seen a plug in a while. So there is a settling process, and it's just so much better than what we had before. We actually had a sand from Ohio that was a white sand, and it was looked great, but it was hard for Chris to get, and we just didn't have a lot of it on hand, and over time it really wore out. So we're very happy with this Foster sand that we picked.
Was the decision primarily made on the basis of color, or was it performance in terms of porosity, angularity, and the lack of buried lies?
It was performance. We looked at some people wanted us to keep the white look that we had before, so we did look at one stand that was a little whiter, but at the end of the day, it was on performance that we picked. And availability, so we can get the sand, I think it's in New Hampshire, right?
Yeah.
So we can get it quickly, and it's not as expensive as the sand we had before, and it played great.
Yeah, and as a golf architect, that's a lose-lose situation. Same with the superintendents. You do not pick the sand for your golf course because it is a lose-lose situation. Because if they don't like it, they're going to say, who picked this sand? And if they like it, you'll never hear anything. So if they like it, hear it. I've never heard anything. So it must be good. But yeah, I don't pick the sand. We put a couple of different options out there, and we let the membership decide, because they can shoot themselves in the foot if they don't like it.
Yeah.
How did you guys choose your bunker liners here? You said Billy, better Billy bunkers what you went with?
No, we didn't. So we did grass liner.
Okay.
That was kind of a recommendation from Tyler.
Yeah, we have a couple photos. I don't know what happened to my slideshow there. I'll get it going again. But we, when it comes down to it, you could do grass liners. Usually you're purchasing the turf for 28 cents to 33 cents delivered, just Kentucky bluegrass. And we have to let it knit in, and then you spray it out. Then you're laying it for usually 20 to 30 cents. So it's usually about 55 to 65 cents all in. Well, Better Billy Bunker, Capcom, some of these really in vogue liners, they're about $3, $2.90 to $3.10 installed.
A square foot.
A square foot, everything's square foot, obviously. So we're looking at 60 or 63 cents a square foot versus $3.10. Better Billy Bunker and Capcom, when you're down at Rhode Island for the meetings, I corner those guys always, and I say, hey, what is the life expectancy? What's the warranty? Well, when it first started, it was 18 years, and it was 15, and it was 12, and it was 10. Well, last time I was in Rhode Island, it was 8. I said, 8? I can get 8 out of sod all day. I've got some courses that are 15 years old with sod line bunkers. So why am I going to spend $3.10 versus 63? I'm going to save the club 5 times the amount. So the warranty for me is and we're so far north in Boston. I think liners are fine in the Mid-Atlantic and stuff like that, where we're not getting that supreme freeze thaw, but I just don't trust it. And when they're not giving you a warranty of 20 years, because that's what we tell all the memberships, all these things are going to be great for 20 years, but then they don't warranty it for 8. I don't know. So I'm just not a big liner guy, because I build a lot of, obviously, flatter bottom Ross bunkers and stuff like that. But it doesn't say, I am doing liners on a bunch of other projects right now. I'm doing Capcom on 2, and I'm doing Better Billy on 2 right now. And so I'm not against them. It's just I give the specifics and the details to the club, and then it's up to the client to decide what to implement. Here's 63 cents. Probably gets you 15 years, 12 years. I'm not sure how many. You're going to want to change the sand anyway after 12 or 15 years anyway, because that sand breaks down and degrades. There's a whole multitude of reasons. So I leave it up to the client. I just say, hey, these are all the prices. I do bid addendum, so I'll do the whole bid document, and then at the end, Matt loves bidding this stuff for me, obviously, but I'll have sod liners in the bid, and you'll see the 63 cents come through, and then there'll be Capcom for $3.10, and then there'll be Better Billy for $2.90. So the club sees all the prices, and they say, oh my gosh, 1.4, for Better Billy, 1.6 for Capcom, 700, 400 for sod. So then it's the club's decision.
So just so you know, maybe an average bunker, no such thing as an average, but a rough bunker project might be 60 or 80,000 square feet. Would that be about, so 60,000 at $2.50 is $150,000 difference right there for the liner. Which, 150,000, that's an item. Matt, is that what you're seeing in terms of, 20 years ago, people were using fabric liners. I guess those are disappearing. Could you talk about what you're seeing and what works in various regions?
Yeah, no, we've seen fabric. There's still some people that use fabric. We don't see a lot of the sand trapper anymore. There's only one decent fabric that we see. It's some, they use it at TVC Boston. It's a Marafi paper. It's actually sewn together. But it does work, but it's, we don't put it in too often. We've done a lot of sod. We did sod here. We did spray the trenches with the billy, and I think that's what you might have heard is that. So we sprayed the trenches with the Better Billy bunker so that the stone didn't migrate up through. It was a fraction of the cost, but it did keep the stone from contaminating the new sand. And I think it worked pretty well. We do a lot of billy bunker. We've done a lot of it this year. So it's kind of ironic. We're at Catanza right now. 10 years ago, we put sod bottoms in there. That was just a sand change out. Now we're doing the bunkers, and the sod we're picking, we can still see the sod liner that's there. So it didn't go anywhere. It now looks like a little layer of loam on the bottom or topsoil between the sand, but it did accomplish what it was supposed to do. So, for us, either way, I don't mind either one of them.
Yeah, I was just wanting to show, you can see the drainage lines and then the sod bunkers, and then obviously the green expansion. You can see the old ovals of the greens here, and how we try to get that old classical shape. But I think, we see a lot of foxes digging in bunkers, trying to get that gravel. I don't know if they like the salt content or what, but that's why we try to, I see some guys put fabric over the drains, the bunker drains, and then do sod liners. But I feel the best thing that I've seen, there's also a product called Gravel Lock that you can get at Home Depot. That is, it's kind of for driveways. If you have a driveway that's dusty, it's kind of like Better Billy polymer, but it's a little more expensive. But we had a couple of the 50-gallon barrels brought in by Matt, and then they literally sprayed the drain trenches. So we laid all the sod for the liners in the bottom, and then obviously we dug the drainage. Put the pea stone in, all the all the drain pipe, yada yada, and then prepped the bottoms, laid the sod. Then he went through with one of or one of your guys, and they sprayed the drain line. So the drain gravel won't migrate up. The foxes, if they dig for the gravel, there won't be any gravel coming up and contaminating the sand. So we felt we created a really great impervious kind of layer. And then the sod's really for rocks. We don't have a high sand flash here. It's only about 18 inches. So we don't have sand wash or sand migration. So if you have a Augusta style bunker, Better Billy or Capcon or another blinder, another bunker style, another bunker liner would be, needed, because that's for more for sand wash. But when you're doing a flatter bottom bunker, like you'll see out here today, that's why I kind of pushed for sod, because it's like, hey, we can save so much money, because that sod's never going to get exposed, because that 5 inches of sand's never really going to move. So a little bit of different animal. I didn't want to try to sell any product or another, but we were just trying to showcase how we had cost efficiencies and how we were trying to save money and think logically about everything.
When that conversation takes place, who's involved and who makes the decision about the liners? Chris, is that your?
Yeah, so I think myself and the Greens Committee kind of made that decision, as we were moving through the project and like with Tyler's recommendation. That's kind of his world, and he's done a bunch of it before.
Yeah, we got asked some questions. Why are you going with sod? At the original meeting, and Tyler handled it. And some people were concerned that it wouldn't hold up over time, and et cetera, et cetera. But it was, Tyler sold it well, and we were on board with it. That's how it happened.
Yeah. During right before the meetings, I kind of went back to look at some of the projects I had done. I had done it in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, New Jersey shore, where there's a lot of rocks, and then I went up to one of Matt's jobs, actually, Staffieri's, and it was, I think, Tedesco, where you guys did some sod liners.
Yeah, we did some sod there, and then they had a few that were real steep face, and then those we chose the Billy bunker. And
Right.
you know, you can do a combination. You don't have to just pick one or the other. And I think it's really applicable what the bunker is. You know, but it does help for sand migration down. But like over here, it's probably not necessary, and it wasn't, and they performed pretty well.
Yeah, so that was eye-opening for me because I saw some of those high sand flashes with the better Billy, and that was working great. But then I saw the flatter bottom. You know, I scooped out some sand and looked at it, and the turf was spectacular. You know, all knitted, still great. It's a great layer, keeping the rocks out. And the superintendent thought it was a home run because they got a lot of cost savings with that. So it's just pretty cool. Just pretty cool seeing all that. You know, learning. That's the best part about this industry. We're learning every day, and we're always kind of evolving and figuring out ways to you know, save money and do things.
Are you maintaining the bunkers? You've got a sand pro out there, I noticed, the ride brake.
Yep.
That's a little easier to pull off with the sod liner as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so, you know, we're extremely short-staffed, so, you know, the sand pro is probably out more often than not, especially too where it's been so wet. It kind of breaks up that sand, fluffs it up a little bit. You know, we just make it a conscious effort to just stay in the bunker floor, you know, stay off the face. We're trying not to rake the faces at all and give that smooth look so the ball releases down into the bottom.
Yeah, and that's also, it's interesting because all these things are playing together. If you have a more angular sand, the ball will roll down to the bottom as well. What you don't want is it getting stuck in the face or rolling to the back where you've got one of those shots where you got to pick the club up vertically. So the design of the bunker is going to conform to the, you have to keep all of these things in mind. It's not that easy. You know, all these members think that they know how to, there's a lot of secret, what's the word, complexity to the dynamics of a bunker. You know, for one thing, you want the ball to roll in, but you don't want the water to go in. So you got to get it moving in different directions. That's a great trick, yeah.
Tyler, you talked a lot about looking at these bunkers and focusing on some of the extreme features when you built some of these grass spaces. And I was lucky enough to talk to Matty, I think, when he got to the first hole, and he kindly told me how extreme they were. But how do you find that happy medium in building these bunkers to make sure that they're going to stand up to 20,000 plus rounds a year? And also with the current staff shortage that we're facing and a lot of people are facing, has that shifted your mentality when you're building these bunkers?
Well, it's a tough question. Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics there and a lot of things I have to ask myself when I'm in the bulldozer, you know, an excavator and shaping these things is, you know, one thing is I've probably worked at almost 50 Ross courses now, and I've learned that if you keep them real soft for maintenance, balls are going to hang up and you'll never hear the end of it from the membership. So actually steeper's better because the balls will hit and kick back down the face and release off the face. So I've actually, as I've gotten older and shaped more and more, obviously, bunkers, I'm in bunkers almost every day, and I'm actually getting them steeper and steeper. But at the same time, I know now to put Mr. Head irrigation in so we can cool down that plant in the summer. Because some of those south-facing bunkers will just heat up after they hit it with the fly mower. So then I also, it's a whole education, you know, with Matt, or not Matt, but Chris, where, you know, I say, all right, I got these 14 bunkers out of 80 that are south-facing. I'm going to put a little more topsoil on these puppies because I don't want them to burn out. So I'm also very cognizant of that. And then I'm also cognizant of, hey, on the north-facing, I'm going to mix in some sandy, gravelly stuff a little bit more because I know those will never get the sun, and I don't want them being too thick and holding balls up. So I used to, you know, when I was younger, you know, 2009, 10, 11, 12, I learned by trial, by error. You know, I remember one course, I mixed up all the topsoil, and then they all burned out because they were too sandy. And then the next one I went to, and I was like, oh, we better get loam. So we got screamed loam. Then they were so damn thick for the first couple of years, you know, balls were just plugging and sticking in the faces. So it was kind of, I had to learn that, okay, you know, each bunker's different. Each bunker's facing a different direction. Some, they get that winter wind, and they come into the spring real thin, you know, and some never get sunlight and are real thick. So I'm always looking at the orientation of each bunker when I'm shaping it, and that goes into a lot of what I'm doing with the face and how much topsoil or how much sand. And then here we always knew there was going to be irrigation coming right behind my work. So I was okay with the steepness because he could always turn on the irrigation and cool down that plant 2, 3, 4 p.m. in the afternoon in the summertime. When you get that summertime heat and that low sun that's just, you know, pounding some of these southern facing bunkers. So for me, it's like I've done turf type tall on bunker face, I've done Kentucky blue, I've done fine fescue, I've done hard fescue, I've done all types of, you know, some clubs like at Skokie we have wispy grass that's 4 inches long and beautiful, but then the balls get held up. You know, in some I don't have Mr. Head irrigation, and then they look like Plinko boards, you know, in about 14 or 15 of those bunkers by the end of summer, because we don't have the Mr. Head irrigation to cool down the plant. So, in my opinion, steeper the better. Get the architecture looking spectacular. They will have to fly mow. We do have the PGRs and growth regulators, you know, so now we can play with, okay, I'm going to throw on a little bit of Mr. Head irrigation so I can water the faces a little bit better. We can throw PGRs if we have to if they're getting too thick. Tyler then set us up for success because he mixed in a little more topsoil on the southern facing ones. On the north facing, we put a little more sandy loam, keep them a little droughtier. So there's like a whole game. You know, there's so many different things we're thinking about when we're building bunkers now. It's not just you hire a contractor and they blow and go and you get what you get. You know, it is like, you know, we're trying to set these guys up for success. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, it was a challenge because we didn't have the Mr. Head irrigation. I think we based watering these bunkers on running everything. And we were in a year where, you know, I went 2 months without running greens, right? So, you know, we did take a beating on some of the south-facing slopes. So we did have to lay some sod this fall, but they're installing that irrigation currently, so it should set us up better for next year.
It just, you know, once that bluegrass went in Tyler, these bunkers, some of them are aggressive. Like, so I would say that, like July, August, September, after Tyler left, we were getting a lot of balls hung up in the face. But Tyler, I kept calling him, Tyler, people are going all over me. And but you know, Tyler would tell me that the bluegrass is juiced. It comes from Rhode Island, and it was juiced. And so it was hanging up, and it was, you know, this year was a lot better. You know, and that's probably the #1 question I get on these spaces. I mean, the golf course is definitely harder than it was, like in some ways, because you could get close to the face and you got to take a wedge and you'll get a bogey, right? But it could roll back to the middle and you get it on the green and get you par. But people were just used to like just having a perfect, you know, not a perfect lie, but not having a face to deal with, and you know, so that's just the way the course is set up, and it's just taking some education. You know, I like to get you know, we'll get it re-rated. It probably will come out a little bit harder, but it's better. It's overall, it's better. But that first season, that bluegrass is a challenge.
Did you guys go with straight bluegrass out or straight bluegrass?
Straight blue.
Same thing on your floors?
Yep. Yep.
It's heavy and it's thick and it's, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely a growth period when we first started. And when you put that sod in, almost every foursome coming off the golf course, like, what did you do? I mean, I'm stuck, I can't get the ball off the meter, I'm digging into the face, I can't hit the shot. And you know, the golf course is so much harder now, but like we said, we'd call Tyler and say, what did you do? You know, almost, but you know, just give it time, it hardens up, and those instances have been cut like 80% now. And we don't have that problem as much as we did. And I think, like Chris said, with the bunkers going in first and now the irrigation coming in second, it's going to be a whole lot. And I tell everybody this year, if you think the golf course was in great shape this year, and I said, if you think the golf course was great this year, wait till next year when this irrigation system comes in with what Tyler's already done. I think it'll be spectacular.
Anybody else? Yeah.
It's working on it. But I thought the best recommendation, Tyler, you made when we walked the course was you just said, well, why don't you guys use the Aussie method for your sand preparation? And maybe Chris and Tyler can talk about that, but I feel like there's no more hang-ups, and it's just been tremendous for the course. And I think Chris and I went out and raked the bunker one day and we proved it out, so maybe you guys can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, so we've just been, like I said earlier, we're just raking the bunker floor. We pretty much do not touch the bunker face. Maybe twice this season we've gone out and hand camped all the faces just to keep the ball, the face firm so that any ball that kind of hits in releases to the bottom of the bunker. And I mean, I don't think we've had a bug ball this season, or I haven't heard of one. It's really kind of changed from last season. I think it was definitely an issue.
Yeah, it's dramatically different.
Yeah.
It looks better too.
Yeah, I think with any club, it's patience, and nobody has patience. But I always tell clubs, it's major surgery. This is like knee surgery or hip surgery. If you get knee surgery in the spring, you're not playing until next year. You're out for the whole year. And so what I always say is like, hey, this is major surgery to these bunkers and these greens. And they're going to take time to knit in and grow in and get tight and get firm, but they always do. These bunker faces get tighter, then we're mowing them tighter with the fly mowers, then we can restrict the water, then we can put the PGRs on if we have to. And the bunker sand, same thing. That first couple months, that bunker sand is soft. You got to take the plate compactors through there, really firm it up, and then do the Aussie method where you turn the rake over and keep it really smooth on the face, and then you're only raking about 75% of the bunker. So in essence, you take your labor way back because you're not really. You might have a footprint or 2 or 3 coming into the bunker where you just have to turn over the rake and fix those footprints, but they're usually not walking up the face or anything.
Yeah.
So I think it's less maintenance actually, and it's a better product, especially if we run those plate compactors once or twice or 3 times a year. But after that major surgery in your back, like with a knee, your back, Woodland we're in our 2nd year now, and it should, all the complaints go away. The turf is mature, the bunker sand's mature, it's set up, it's firm, it's playing how it should. But it's major surgery, and you just have to tell clubs to be patient, which is obviously very tough.
The other thing to think about, and Matt touched on it earlier, is the time of year you do the work. And we, like he said, we did it in May, June, and going forward. So we didn't do it in August and September and have those other months for it to harden and to knit in. It was kind of, when he did it, it was being used almost.
Thrown right into the fire with that,
Right.
and
so of course it was going to get hung.
yeah. And the steepness too. I think the big thing now is it's not only the steepness of the slope, but it's the steepness of your sweep coming in. We really have to concentrate on getting from where you cut your edge down to your floor as steep as possible to get the ball to roll into the floor. And a lot of guys, if you leave it really flat, that's where it sticks. And it's really getting those as steep as possible. And that, it's a big. We've had to, sometimes you have to go back and do it. And when you add, you have to account for the better billy bunker, the sod. All of it's another layer. And the more layers you put on, the flatter it's going to get. So you really got to accent your lower subgrade a lot to make it, to look less. It's going to look severe when you're doing it, but as you put your sand in, it'll be less severe.
Matt, who does that part of the shaping? Is that Tyler, or do you guys do that to avoid that hinge at the bottom?
We do that. Like Tyler come in and he kind of looks, and we'll, sometimes it's the first few bunkers. It's trials and tribulations to get it really, Some of his bunkers, when we first did our first bunker on number 3, it was a whole learning curve because we had never done a lot of stuff we do is with our buckets, and we get it. They're pretty smooth, but you'll see when you go out there, tiles are really. A lot of it was a lot of undulations on the face, and it was something we had to come up with a system to get it done. And we ended up using just the 1 foot bucket and kind of heal it and packing it in, and whatever happened, which kind of gave you that more natural look. The more you try to contrive something, the more it's going to look like that. So that was it was pretty cool. It was something different, and once we got that system, and the first few was good.
And Brad, just one more thing as you go out today, like if you look at the shape of the bunkers, it's just very different from, looking down on each bunker. They're just not clean cut. And, I think our number was 800,000, and, again, we're doing this irrigation project, so it sounds like we spend a lot of money, but Woodland doesn't, it's tough to get things approved here and spend money. And the number one thing I heard, people told me I voted for it because everyone else voted for it. I didn't think it would make a difference. People going forward, once they start playing it, they feel like it's a brand new golf course, even though it's a bunker project. And if you call it $1 million project, people say it looks like $3 or $4 million was spent out there. Just with the way the bunkers are shaped and greens are expanded. So keep that in mind when you go out there, guys.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Just a quick question. Have you guys felt like you've been able to attract more members with all this work that you've been able to do here as well, too?
Definitely. Yeah, no question.
So along with that, how did you pay for the project here?
It was an assessment. We did an assessment. I think it was with 3,000. Yeah, 3,000 a member. Again, we hadn't had an assessment in a long, long time per se, so it was okay. A couple different levels that you could do it at, but we did 100% assessment on this one, so there's no. It just went through, and we didn't fund it with any additional money. Now with the irrigation, we had some money saved that we were able to fund it, and there's also another assessment with that, but it's actually less, I think, with the irrigation, which is a much bigger project than it was with the bunkers.
By the way, one advantage, I'm just thinking, is steep faces is it discourages golfers from trying to climb up. So while it's a bit of a burden on the maintenance staff, it actually contributes to the long-term stability of the bunker.
Climbers out there.
What are they, like 1-to-1 slopes or 1 to 1.5?
Pretty steep.
Did you staple the sod in? Right.
And I mean, I think everybody will, we're trying to make them, one, aesthetically pleasing and play like they were meant to play. The old classic courses up here in Boston were really rugged and rough and really cool, but they were pretty hard. So I'm not trying to make the place too hard, but I also wanted to, there's so many different factors, but also wanted to make them, I just wanted to do something a little different in Boston and showcase, what some of the old rugged bunkers used to look like. So I wanted people to come here and be like, oh, Woodland used to be so milquetoast and boring, and they had these really big saucers and peanuts, these Mickey Mouse looking bunkers. Seriously, some of them were on the slideshow where they're literally just peanut shaped, figure eights. And I just wanted to give it a little more antiquity and character and really be bold. And then when people in Boston would play here, they feel like they're playing an old classic, bold New England golf course. And so I just wanted it to be meaningful. And so when you play it today, you might be in a couple and you might curse me. But hey, Ross thought, they were half-stroke penalties. So if you hit it in the bunker, you weren't supposed to hit it right in the middle of the green because they were supposed to be hazards. They were meaningful. You're supposed to avoid the hazards at all costs. And so Ross, there's not that many out there. I mean, I can't remember the number, 72, 69.
Yeah, I think 66.
66. There's not an incredible amount. It's not like Aronimink that has 182 bunkers. So there's not a crazy amount. So the few that are out there, they're meaningful, and it's the player's objective to avoid the hazards. Like that's what Ross would always say. It's on the player to avoid the hazards. And so I was trying to go back to the ethos of the game, golden age, classic architecture. So we'll hope you like it.
Great. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Thank you.
Tyler, just one question for you with regard to the bunkers and the bunker faces. Certainly a different look there. I guess I would characterize them as rumpled, but perhaps you might have a different descriptive for them with your design intent.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many photos that we've found over the years that show the team of horses, they would call it, and the big 1.5 yard scoop. So anything built before 1930, the bulldozers came into fruition at Augusta National in 1930. Those were the first dozers used, Caterpillar. And there's all these articles on them with Mackenzie building Augusta with these brand new Caterpillars. And then Ross first used them at Allegheny Country Club in Pittsburgh in 1933. So bulldozers and excavators obviously weren't around. And so everything was horse pulled or donkey pulled, and then a big 1.5 yard scoop. So they'd scoop these things up and then kind of just seat them, and they would be pretty darn steep. You see, there's old pictures of Salem where the bunkers literally look vertical. Really cool. It's in your book, actually, sitting behind us. And so I used a lot of old photos, Mark, to really create the inspiration. And that's what we were going for. 1903, early Ross. So I was trying to hit the period style from 1903 to 1930. Wrinkled, rumpled, but natural, old world character.
Yeah, excellent. Well, certainly unique and distinctive for sure. So, any other last questions for our panel? We wrap up? Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and expertise today. We appreciate that, and thank you.